The air in Rome, usually thick with the murmur of commerce and the clang of artisans, had grown heavy with an unspoken tension. Julius Caesar, a man whose name echoed across every corner of the vast republic, had ascended to a height of power previously unimaginable. His victories were legendary, his influence absolute, and with each decree, each new honor bestowed upon him, a chilling fear began to slither through the hallowed halls of the Roman Senate. Whispers of tyranny replaced the once boisterous debates, and the shadow of an emperor loomed, threatening to extinguish the very essence of the republic they so fiercely cherished. Amidst this growing apprehension stood Brutus, a man carved from the very ideals of Roman liberty, yet burdened by an agonizing conflict. He was a protege of Caesar, a recipient of his favor, a man whose lineage proudly boasted ancestors who had expelled kings and founded the republic. His heart was a battlefield where personal loyalty wrestled with an idealized vision of Rome, a vision untainted by the absolute rule of one man. Brutus believed in the republic, in its delicate balance of power, in the senator's sacred duty to preserve it, even if it meant a betrayal of the deepest kind. Opposite him, yet allied in purpose, was Cassius. Lean, hungry, and with eyes that seemed to perpetually dissect the weaknesses of others, Cassius was the cunning instigator, the serpent in the garden of their conspiracy. Unlike Brutus, his motivations were a complex tapestry of ambition, resentment, and a deep-seated distrust of Caesar's unchecked authority. He saw Caesar not just as a threat to the Republic, but as a personal affront, a man whose brilliance overshadowed his own. It was Cassius who meticulously wove the threads of discontent, turning whispers into determined vows, shaping the amorphous fear into a concrete, deadly plan. The conspiracy, born in hushed tones and furtive glances, took shape with terrifying speed. Each conspirator, whether driven by lofty ideals of liberty or by personal grievances, found common ground in the perceived necessity of Caesar's removal. The preservation of Rome, they argued, demanded a sacrifice. The Ides of March, 44 BCE, dawned deceptively calm. Caesar, ignoring omens and pleas, walked into the Senate where his fate awaited. The attack was swift, brutal, and horrifying in its intimacy. 23 times the daggers plunged, each strike a testament to betrayal, to fear, to the desperate attempt to reset the course of history. Caesar fell, not by the hand of a distant enemy, but by those he had called friends, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable chaos and blood. Rome erupted. Confusion reigned supreme, quickly giving way to a volatile mix of shock, grief, and fear. In the immediate aftermath, Brutus, still stained with Caesar's blood, stood before the bewildered populace in the Forum. His speech, delivered with earnest conviction, attempted to justify the horrific act as a necessary evil, a sacrifice for liberty. He spoke of Caesar's ambition, of freedom, of the Republic, believing that the Roman people would understand, that they would embrace their liberation. But Brutus had misjudged the heart of Rome. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, a man whose grief was as genuine as his political acumen, followed with his own eulogy. Masterfully, he turned public opinion with each poignant word, each calculated pause, transforming Caesar from an aspiring tyrant into a beloved leader, and the conspirators from liberators into ruthless villains. The crowd, swayed by Antony's emotional appeal and the stark reality of Caesar's bloody toga, turned into a furious mob, demanding vengeance. The conspirators, their grand plan unraveling before their eyes, were forced to flee. Brutus, Cassius, and their co-conspirators, once hailed as saviors in their own minds, now found themselves fugitives, scrambling for safety as Rome's fury mounted. This hasty flight marked not an escape, but the beginning of a relentless pursuit, not merely by the enraged citizens or the legions of Rome, but by fate itself, a destiny forged in the crucible of betrayal and blood. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The sudden vacuum of power left by Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into a dangerous instability. The Senate, initially emboldened by the conspirators' act, soon found itself adrift, caught between the idealized republic and the grim reality of a populace clamoring for order and, more importantly, for revenge. Into this tumultuous void stepped three figures, each with their own complex motivations and formidable ambitions: Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Antony, still reeling from the loss of his friend and patron, burned with a desire to avenge Caesar's death, his grief a powerful engine for political mobilization. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, though young and initially underestimated, possessed a cold, calculating intellect and an unwavering resolve to claim his rightful inheritance and solidify his burgeoning power. Lepidus, a less dominant figure, offered military support, a necessary component in the fractured landscape of Roman politics. Together, these three men forged the Second Triumvirate, an alliance born not of shared ideals, but of a mutual need for stability and, crucially, a shared enemy. Their decree was clear, their objective singular: to hunt down and eliminate every last one of Caesar's assassins. The blood of the conspirators would be shed to cleanse Rome, to restore order, and to cement the triumvirate's authority. This was not merely a political maneuver, it was a vendetta, a promise of relentless pursuit that echoed across the vast Roman world. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius, having fled Rome, desperately sought to rally support in the east. They traversed Greece and Asia Minor, their once proud retinue now a fragmented collection of exiles and mercenaries. The task was monumental. They struggled with dwindling resources, their coffers never quite full enough to sustain a proper army, and faced the disheartening reality of wavering loyalties among local rulers and former allies. The grand ideals they espoused of a liberated republic often seemed to fall on deaf ears, overshadowed by the looming threat of the triumvirate's legions. Internal conflicts gnawed at their already strained alliance. Brutus, ever the idealist, clung to the principles of honorable warfare and republican virtue, often clashing with Cassius's more pragmatic, even ruthless, approach. Cassius, recognizing the dire nature of their predicament, urged for swift, decisive action, for any means necessary to secure their survival. Their disagreements were not mere squabbles. They were fundamental clashes of philosophy, highlighting the divergent paths that had led them to conspire against Caesar in the first place. The psychological toll on both men was immense. The weight of their actions, the ghost of Caesar, and the ever-present threat of impending doom haunted their waking hours and disturbed their fitful sleep. Brutus often found himself staring into the flickering flames of a campfire, his mind replaying the fateful Ides of March, questioning if their sacrifice had truly been for the greater good, or if they had simply unleashed a more terrible beast. Cassius, though outwardly stoic, carried the burden of leadership with a grim determination, the lines of worry etched deeper into his face with each passing day. Antony, fueled by a potent mix of personal grief and political ambition, pursued them with an almost fanatical zeal. His legions were disciplined, his strategy shrewd, and his resolve unshakable. He saw the conspirators not as misguided patriots, but as murderers who had robbed Rome of its greatest son and himself of a cherished friend. Octavian, in contrast, viewed the extermination of the conspirators with a cold, calculating detachment. For him, it was a necessary step, a strategic imperative to consolidate his own power, to remove any potential rivals, and to secure his claim as Caesar's true successor. He understood that the death of the assassins would legitimize his authority and pave the way for his ultimate ascension. In one tense encounter near the coast of Lycia, a small contingent of Brutus's forces, attempting to secure vital supplies, narrowly avoided capture by Antony's scouts. The conspirators learned of the close call only through a desperate messenger, a tattered scroll clutched in his trembling hand. The news sent a shiver through their ranks, a stark reminder of the triumvirate's relentless reach. The shadow of the triumvirate loomed larger with each passing day, a dark, inescapable cloud promising an inevitable bloody confrontation that would decide the fate of Rome and of the men who dared to strike down its most powerful citizen. The conspirators, now established in their makeshift headquarters in the east, redoubled their desperate efforts to raise armies and funds. Brutus, with his reputation for integrity, appealed to the Greek city-states for support, framing their struggle as a defense of liberty against tyranny, a return to the glorious days of the Republic. Cassius, ever the pragmatist, focused on extracting resources from the wealthy provinces of Asia Minor, often employing less diplomatic, more coercive methods. Their combined forces, though growing, remained a patchwork of loyalists, mercenaries, and local levies, a stark contrast to the disciplined legions of the Triumvirate. Across the Aegean, the Second Triumvirate commanded superior resources and a unified, albeit sometimes fractious, command. Antony, a seasoned general, meticulously planned the campaign against the assassins, his strategic brilliance undeniable. He envisioned a swift, decisive strike, eager to avenge Caesar and solidify his own position. Octavian, despite his youth, displayed a remarkable grasp of logistics and political maneuvering, ensuring a steady flow of supplies and reinforcements. While Lepidus remained a part of the Triumvirate, his influence was steadily waning, subtly undermined by Octavian's growing ambition and Antony's dominant military presence. The tension between Antony and Octavian, though often concealed beneath a veneer of cooperation, was palpable, a quiet undercurrent of rivalry that would eventually erupt. Brutus, in the solitude of his tent, often grappled with the profound moral implications of his actions. Had he truly saved Rome from a tyrant, or had he merely condemned it to a more brutal, prolonged civil war? The ideals of the Republic, once so clear and pure, now seemed muddied by the bloodshed and the relentless pursuit. He reread ancient texts, seeking solace and justification in the words of philosophers, but doubt gnawed at him. The weight of Caesar's ghost, not as a physical apparition but as a moral burden, pressed heavily upon his conscience. Cassius, on the other hand, had shed any lingering idealism. Survival and ultimately victory had become his singular focus. He grew more ruthless in his decisions, more pragmatic in his strategies, believing that the purity of their cause would be vindicated only by their triumph. He pushed his men harder, demanded more from the local populations, driven by an unwavering conviction that failure meant not just death, but the utter annihilation of everything they had fought for. His eyes, once sharp with cunning, now held a glint of desperation. The emotional weight of the impending conflict was immense. Families across the Roman world were divided, loyalties split, friendships strained to breaking point. Propaganda flowed freely from both sides. The Triumvirate painted the conspirators as parricides, traitors who had murdered a benevolent leader, promising peace and stability once they were eradicated. Brutus and Cassius, in turn, cast themselves as the last defenders of liberty, the champions of the Republic against the encroaching tyranny of the triumvirs. They issued manifestos, sent envoys, and delivered rousing speeches, each trying to win the hearts and minds of the common people, knowing that public opinion could sway the tides of war. One evening, as the chill winds swept through their camp, a young officer, a distant relative of Brutus, approached him with trepidation. His voice barely a whisper, he confessed his fear, not of death, but of the futility of their struggle, of the endless cycle of violence. Brutus, seeing the genuine terror in the young man's eyes, felt a pang of his own vulnerability. He offered words of encouragement, but the moment revealed the immense psychological toll their desperate fight was taking on everyone, including himself. Antony, meanwhile, had finalized his strategic plans. He intended to meet the conspirators head-on, to crush them with the overwhelming might of the Triumvirate's legions. He knew the terrain of Macedonia well, and he was confident in his troops' discipline and experience. Octavian, though still recovering from an illness, pressed his own generals to hasten their advance, eager to participate in the final, decisive battle. His ambition, a cold flame burning bright within him, subtly undermined Lepidus's authority, shifting more and more power into his own hands, even as he feigned deference to Antony. The stage was now irrevocably set for a monumental clash, a confrontation where personal vengeance, the legacy of Caesar, and the very fate of Rome hung precariously in the balance. The whispers of war had grown into a roar, and the fields of Philippi awaited their bloody destiny. The fields of Philippi, now drenched in the early morning dew, braced for the inevitable. The two massive armies stood arrayed against each other, a testament to the bitter divisions tearing Rome apart. On one side, the disciplined legions of Antony and Octavian, fueled by a thirst for vengeance and the promise of a new order. On the other, the forces of Brutus and Cassius, a heterogeneous mix fighting for an idealized republic that seemed to slip further from their grasp with every passing day. The air crackled with a tension so thick it felt almost tangible, a prelude to the storm. The initial engagement erupted with furious intensity. Brutus, leading his wing against Octavian's forces, displayed a tactical brilliance that surprised even his own seasoned commanders. His men, inspired by his personal courage and unwavering belief in their cause, surged forward with unexpected ferocity. Octavian, still weakened by illness and perhaps lacking the seasoned battle experience of Antony, found his lines buckling under the sustained assault. His camp was overrun, his legions scattered, and he himself was forced to flee the field, a humiliating retreat for the aspiring heir of Caesar. A momentary cheer, raw and triumphant, rose from Brutus's ranks, a fleeting glimpse of hope in the grim reality of war. However, on the other flank, the tide of battle turned brutally against Cassius. Facing the formidable Antony, a general renowned for his strategic acumen and inspiring leadership, Cassius's forces found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. Antony's legions, veterans of countless campaigns, pressed their advantage relentlessly. The battle for Cassius was a brutal, desperate struggle, his lines slowly crumbling under the relentless pressure. As the day wore on, the defeat became undeniable, a crushing blow to the conspirators' morale and their strategic position. In the chaos and dust of the retreating forces, a tragic misunderstanding unfolded, one that would seal the fate of the remaining conspirators. Cassius, his vision obscured by the swirling dust and the despair of defeat, saw a detachment of horsemen approaching his position. Believing them to be Antony's reserves closing in for the kill, and unaware of Brutus's success on the other wing, Cassius succumbed to utter despair. He could not bear the thought of capture, nor the humiliation that would surely follow. In a desperate act of self-preservation and convinced that all was lost, he ordered his freedman, Pindarus, to take his life. Pindarus, with a heavy heart, obeyed, and Cassius, the cunning instigator of the conspiracy, fell upon his own sword. When Brutus finally learned of Cassius's defeat and tragic death, a profound grief washed over him, momentarily eclipsing the elation of his own victory. The news struck him like a physical blow. He rushed to the scene, discovering his friend's lifeless body amidst the carnage. Brutus, his voice heavy with sorrow, lamented the loss, calling Cassius the last of the Romans, a testament to their shared ideals and the bond forged in conspiracy. The death of Cassius was not merely the loss of a co-commander, it was the extinguishing of a vital flame, a strategic mind, and a trusted companion. The Triumvirate, despite Octavian's initial setback, quickly regrouped. Antony, capitalizing on Cassius's demise, rallied his victorious legions and prepared for a renewed assault. The psychological impact of Cassius's death on Brutus and his remaining forces was devastating. Hope, fragile as it had been, began to fracture. The conspirators, already a disparate group, now felt the true weight of their isolation, their unity shattered by despair. Whispers of dissent and defection began to spread through the ranks, further weakening their resolve. One prominent figure, a former ally of Cassius, subtly began making overtures to Antony, seeing the writing on the wall. The growing sense of inevitability for Brutus and his cause became a palpable, suffocating presence. With Cassius gone, Brutus faced an impossible choice. Alone against the combined might of a vengeful Rome, his noble ideals now appearing tragically naive. The Battle of Philippi was far from over. It had merely entered its most agonizing phase. The second engagement of the Battle of Philippi dawned with a chilling certainty for Brutus. His forces, already severely outnumbered, were now profoundly demoralized by the loss of Cassius and the relentless pressure from the Triumvirate. The fleeting triumph of the previous day felt like a cruel illusion, replaced by the stark reality of their predicament. Brutus, his face etched with exhaustion and grief, made a final desperate attempt to rally his dwindling troops. He rode among them, his voice hoarse, speaking not of victory, but of honor, of the dying ideal of the republic they had sworn to protect. He reminded them of their shared purpose, of the tyranny they had fought to prevent, but the fire that had once burned so brightly in their eyes had dimmed, replaced by a weary resignation. That night, before the final confrontation, Brutus found himself haunted by visions. He saw not only the pale, accusing face of Cassius, but also a spectral figure, gaunt and silent, resembling Julius Caesar himself. The apparition, devoid of anger, merely stood there, a silent testament to the devastating consequences of Brutus's actions. The phantom seemed to whisper, not words, but a profound, unanswerable question about the true cost of liberty. Brutus awoke with a gasp, the chilling encounter reinforcing his growing realization that his act, intended to save Rome, had instead plunged it into a deeper, more brutal cycle of violence. The republic he cherished was not merely lost, it had been irrevocably shattered by his very hand. The final moments of the battle were a bloody and futile struggle. The Triumvirate's legions, invigorated by their previous success and the clear disarray in the enemy ranks, advanced with methodical precision. Brutus's men fought bravely, but it was a fight against overwhelming odds, a desperate rearguard action rather than a bid for victory. The field became a maelstrom of steel and cries, a horrifying tableau of a cause in its death throes. Brutus, seeing his standard-bearers fall, his lines collapse, and his once proud army disintegrate around him, knew with absolute clarity that his vision of the Republic was irretrievably lost. His act, born of noble intentions, had been tragically in vain. The dream of a free Rome, free from the tyranny of one man, had ironically paved the way for the absolute rule of another. He retreated with a small band of loyal followers to a rocky outcrop, the sounds of battle slowly fading into the grim twilight. The choice was stark: capture and public humiliation, or an honorable exit. Brutus, unable to face the prospect of being paraded through Rome as a vanquished foe, chose the latter. He asked his companions to assist him, but each, in turn, refused, unable to bear the thought of taking their beloved general's life. Finally, a loyal friend, Strato, agreed to hold his sword. Brutus, uttering a final, poignant farewell to his ideals and his life, fell upon the blade. The last champion of the Republic, the man who had loved Caesar but loved Rome more, lay dead. The news of Brutus's death reached Antony and Octavian swiftly. Their reactions, though both acknowledging the significance of the event, revealed their fundamentally differing perspectives. Antony, ever the more emotional and magnanimous of the two, approached Brutus's body with a respectful solemnity. He ordered his own cloak draped over the fallen general, a gesture of honor for a worthy adversary. Antony, standing over the lifeless form, delivered a eulogy that acknowledged Brutus's noble intentions, despite their conflict. He spoke of Brutus as an honorable man, the only one of the conspirators who had acted out of genuine conviction for the public good, rather than malice or envy. In Antony's eyes, Brutus was a tragic figure, a man of integrity caught in an impossible historical current. Octavian, however, viewed Brutus's demise with a cold, pragmatic detachment. For him, Brutus was simply another obstacle removed, another enemy eliminated in his relentless ascent to power. There was no eulogy, no sentimental gesture, only the quiet satisfaction of a strategic objective achieved. The death of Brutus marked the end of an era, the final gasp of the old republic. But the ripples of the assassination continued to spread, claiming more lives in the relentless pursuit of vengeance and the complete consolidation of power. The stage was now set for the next, equally brutal, chapter of Rome's transformation. The relentless hunt for Caesar's assassins continued with brutal efficiency, a macabre epilogue to the drama of Philippi. The Triumvirate, now firmly in control, systematically tracked down and executed the remaining conspirators, their fates sealed by the very act they believed would liberate Rome. Decimus Brutus, once a trusted confidant of Caesar and one of the primary architects of the plot, suffered a particularly ignominious end. He had attempted to flee to Macedonia, but his own troops, sensing the shifting tides of power, betrayed him. Captured by Antony's forces, he was summarily executed, his head sent to Rome as a grim trophy, a stark message to any who dared defy the new order. Trebonius, another key conspirator, had met his demise even earlier, captured and killed in Asia Minor by Dolabella, an ally of Antony, his head impaled on a spear and paraded through Smyrna. The message was clear. There would be no forgiveness, no escape for those who had struck down the Republic's most powerful figure. The Triumvirate's brutal efficiency in consolidating power was undeniable. With the major conspirators eliminated, Antony and Octavian, having effectively sidelined Lepidus, began the ruthless process of purging any remaining opposition. Proscriptions, lists of condemned citizens whose property was confiscated and whose lives were forfeit, became the chilling instrument of their authority. Thousands perished, many innocent, as personal vendettas were settled under the guise of political necessity. Rome bled, not from the wounds of civil war in distant lands, but from the systemic violence inflicted upon its own citizens. This dark period underscored the profound instability unleashed by Caesar's death, a stark contrast to the stability the conspirators had claimed to champion. The long-term consequences of Caesar's assassination were now undeniable and ironic. The men who had killed him to save the Republic had, in fact, irrevocably destroyed it. Their act, intended to prevent a king, had merely paved the way for an emperor. The very thing they feared, absolute rule by one man, was now manifesting in its most complete form. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, emerged from the crucible of civil war as the undisputed master of the Roman world. Through a combination of shrewd political maneuvering, military victories, and calculated ruthlessness, he slowly but surely transformed himself from a vengeful heir into the revered Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He meticulously dismantled the old republican institutions, replacing them with a new autocratic system that, ironically, brought an unprecedented era of peace and stability, the Pax Romana, but at the cost of the very liberty the conspirators had so desperately sought to protect. The themes of justice, revenge, and the cyclical nature of power resonated deeply through this historical drama. The conspirators, driven by what they perceived as justice for the Republic, unleashed a wave of revenge that ultimately consumed them. Their actions, intended to break the cycle of individual dominance, instead accelerated it, culminating in an even more centralized and powerful form of governance. The motivations of the conspirators, though often noble in their stated ideals, were ultimately futile. They failed to grasp that the Republic was already dying, its institutions too weak to contain the ambitions of powerful individuals like Caesar. Their intervention, rather than saving it, merely hastened its demise, clearing the path for an even greater concentration of power. The enduring legacy of Julius Caesar, the man whose death was meant to prevent tyranny, is perhaps the most profound irony. His assassination, far from diminishing his influence, cemented it. His name, Caesar, became synonymous with emperor, a title that would echo through history for centuries. His death, an act of desperate preservation, ironically paved the way for the very thing he was accused of seeking: absolute power, realized not by him, but by his adopted son. The moral ambiguity of these events leaves a lasting impression. Who truly won? The conspirators died to preserve a republic that was already collapsing. The Triumvirate achieved their vengeance and power, but at the cost of immense bloodshed and the republic itself. What was truly lost? The Roman Republic, with its ideals of shared governance and civic liberty, vanished, replaced by an empire built on the foundations of ambition, betrayal, and relentless power. The era of the assassins ended, and Rome, forever changed by the Ides of March, entered a new, autocratic age, leaving behind a haunting tale of ideals, ambition, and the tragic consequences of political violence.